right, everybody, we're going to get started. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Caroline Baxter. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Education and Training. Can you guys hear me in the back? Can you get a thumbs up? Thank you, everybody. All right, I'm really excited about this particular panel, and especially the panelists that we've got. I think this is really going to be one of the opportunities that ITSEC provides us to get off the dime and stop appreciating the problem and start actually thinking about some of the solutions that we face. This particular one obviously is on the Indo-Pacific, and so all of our conversation is going to be oriented around that. I'm going to hold until we can close the door. Thanks, Carl. All right. I'd say it's pretty safe to say that when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, it's getting to put up or shut up time in terms of training. There is no single service that's going to own this future conflict. And what we're facing demands an all-service, all-domain, joint, interoperable approach, and I'm not the first one to say this. The services themselves are saying that in some of their planning documents. I'll quote the Army of 2030. The Army is changing the way it organizes, equips, and fights. After 2 decades of focusing on brigades rotating in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan, the Army is shifting its organizational focus to larger formations that are more capable of working with our sister services, allies, and partners around the globe. From the Marine Corps Force Design 2030, we are redesigning the Corps because current and future threats call for a significantly more capable force with new operating concepts. The joint warfighting concept signed out in March of last year signaled the beginning of all domain operations. So all of these documents are telling us pretty much the same thing. Our adversaries are going to attack at our seams. Our seams are traditionally cross-domain integration. To meet this threat head-on, we have to stop prioritizing training to task proficiency and start preparing jointly for contested and contested operations. The Indo-Pacific presents a pretty unique challenge, and one that we haven't faced in a really long time. A peer adversary, a region with no collective defense agreement, that's something that would enable easy ABO and RSOI that we really depend on, we're used to using, and mis and disinformation that's creating an ever thicker fog of war. All domains will be contested all the time, from space all the way through to undersea. I could go on, but happily for you, I will not. This is when I ask our distinguished group of speakers to do the talking, so let me introduce each of them in turn. Vice Admiral Scott Kahn, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations N9. Lieutenant General Kevin Imes, Commanding General Training and Education Command. Major General Al Miller, Director of Training and Readiness, Headquarters Air Force. Brigadier General Chuck Lombardo, Director of Training G357. And Brigadier General Mike Drowley, Director of Joint Training and Exercise, Indo-PACOM J7. So a quick note, as this roundtable progresses, you're going to see members of my team walking through the aisle with cards. Please write down a question for me to ask. If any of these questions is more of a comment, less of a question, I will unceremoniously toss it over my shoulder, and you will know that your question will not get asked. So please be brief, and please actually ask a question. So with that, I will turn it over to Vice Admiral Kahn.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today, particularly with this the panel up here, all teammates focusing on the same missions that we're going to, one, first try to prevent, and then if we have to fight and win, to be able to do so. I'm going to hit some high-level themes that I've observed. I've been privileged to wear the cloth of our nation for 37 years, and I've been heavily into training for at least since I've been a flag officer on these types of discussions in live virtual construction. I think we all acknowledge that the PRC is the pacing threat. They are growing in both capability and capacity at a pretty phenomenal rate. In my view, we've kind of come first circle in my career. Joined the Navy in 1985, started to deploy. You had the former Soviet Union out there meeting our carriers and our ships, war games, exercises, all geared toward the former Soviet Union as a pacing threat. And the Berlin Wall went down, and we were the sole superpower. No one could challenge the maritime sea control. No one could challenge us in a maritime strike, which are probably 2 prolonged missions for the Navy, 30, 50, as long as the Navy will exist. So we're back to now that the PRC is a growing threat, it's real, it's relevant. It's been full circle from during my career. When I look at training in light of the pacing threat, I look at it, you know, you got the individual level training, unit level training, and integrated level training. And integrated, as that word has different meanings throughout my career. As a Nautic commander out in Fallon, it was initially, hey, it's about the air wing. And then we had some capabilities that were put out in Fallon with simulators for our surface ships, specifically for our Air Defense Commander, knowing that we had to integrate the training between the Air Defense Commander and the air wing at a very high security level. As I look to the future with what is being built in Fallon and what is being built in Nellis, and being able to connect those two facilities is going to be very, very powerful. Because we talk interoperable, and quite frankly, I think the word is interdependent. There are interdependencies across the joint force that are going to have to be applied. And when you have an interdependent force, you're only as strong as the weakest link in that kill chain of command. Our people are going to have to be trained to do the missions to the level of proficiency that they are going to, that they must be able to perform. At CSG4, I looked at it, hey, it's more than just carriers. It's also these things called amphibious ships. And how we train and certify those forces. And the third fleet became relatively apparent, hey, it's not just about various maritime task forces, it's also about our allies, our partners, our friends. Having commanded the RIMPAC 2020. Relatively small, but last year, RIMPAC 2022 was, I think, 26 nations, 25,000 people, 41 ships, all working together in Hawaii. Because times of crisis, all nations can surge capability. But what you cannot surge is trust. And that trust has to be earned, and that trust is earned through training. So in terms of where we are from a training environment perspective, we are en route and in progress too to create an environment to stimulate training from operational commanders down to individual level operators. Because that is how we're going to fight. And when I say operational commanders, I'm talking numbered fleets and below. The various maritime operations centers, the task forces that are going to be given battle space. In some cases from the seabed to space. And they're going to have to execute missions in that battle space based on mission orders. And if you think of the expanse of the Pacific, where from the coast of Vietnam you go across the Philippines and about another 1,000 miles, that's the size of the continent of the United States. And it's about another continent and a half to get to Hawaii. Geography hasn't changed much since World War II. The range of fires definitely has. Admiral Giambastani, raise your hand if you've heard his name before. He used to talk about the method and means military organizations can execute missions. They can deconflict, they can coordinate, they can synchronize, or they can be interdependent. And when he brought this up, I was in 05, 06 at the time, and I didn't know what the heck he meant by interdependency. I now understand it. In terms of where we're going with long-range fires, in terms of where we're going to having to fight as a joint force, presenting multiple dilemmas against the PRC, multi-axis, multi-domain. It's not how we're going to concentrate our forces, it's how we're going to concentrate our fires. And then when you look at the various other concepts of operations, some Navy, some Marines, the Army in terms of distributed maritime operations, you probably heard about that, littoral operations in a contested environment, expeditionary air basing operations, Marine littoral regiments, and all the same things that are applicable to the Air Force. We're all talking about the same stuff in terms of how we need to maneuver. So you have a pacing threat. We've gone full circle. We understand training at the individual unit and integrated level. And whether it's interoperability or interdependency, sometimes that's just semantics. But it does mean different things to different people. How are we going to create a training environment that can execute along those concept of operations with the things we need to do across the services with our allies and partners. Within the Navy, CNOs has assigned us key operational problems. They're classified. I'm not going to say what they are. What are the key operational problems that we need to close? And the process by which we're taking a disciplined methodology and doing that is called the NAV Plan Implementation Framework. And there's a number of them, but I'm just going to talk about 8. We call it 4+4. How we're going to shoot, read long-range fires. How we're going to maneuver, think about counter C5 ISRT. How we're going to resupply, rearm, refuel, revive, repair. And how we're going to defend. Think terminal defense or point defense, depending on where you happen to be located. And then there's some things that aren't very sexy, but by God, they're important. Our networks, and with the work that Rebel Small's doing with Project Overmatch, in line with Project Convergence, in line with EDMS, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're all going down that path towards JADC2, but none of the services can wait. We have to make sure that we're working in parallel paths and not divergent paths. And those conversations are taking place. And then, who in here has read CNO's NAP Plan 2022? All right, and he talks about the 6 imperatives that we need to make our investments in. Hey, let me be clear. I am here to look at my industry partners as best I can in an unclassified form to give you a clear set of headlights of where we're going. I owe you that. Because this is going to be us solving this. With the 6 Ds, more distance, more defense, more deception, more delivery, more decision advantage. And I missed one. No, I think I hit them all. And you look at our ranges today. We're running out of real estate. Measured in terms of size and physical space, based on some of these long-range kill chains, access control spectrum, which is going to be very important, but it makes the FAA and FCC really nervous, as well as some of the limitations with spectrum sell-off. You throw in increasing concerns and vulnerabilities to OPSEC. Some of our high-end trainings, that's why it's going into buildings. Be able to execute at the level we need to execute, fully informed and not reveal our hand. And then LVC also will provide some opportunities. As a 3rd Fleet Commander, if war broke out, I knew that I was not going to be given the time that I had planned on to train our people and push them forward. There's going to be a very strong demand signal to go faster. So how do we train to the fight? And that's where we get to my words, untethered ranges that can stimulate training, again, from operational commanders down to individual level operators on the way to the fight. Some of these capabilities may be able to provide reach-back support in times of conflict, where we didn't get everything right in our training, where there was, let's just say, a curveball thrown off that we weren't expecting. We have to, be very rapid and agile in terms of defining the problem, getting in some of these facilities, and providing the people forward with the updated tactics, techniques, and procedures in order to win. Those that are going to be able to adapt quicker is going to be a heck of a lot better off. So that's another aspect of LVC that I look at. So I don't know if I went 10 minutes, but I'm going to stop there again just to kind of give you my view of the world as the N9 for the Navy, fully understanding we are a joint force and no single service can do it alone. We're going to have to work together. I think the word hard has been used. hard in this environment is authorized.
Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant General Wolfie Imes. Just want to talk a couple of things. I'm going to dovetail in right behind where Admiral Khan is talking about. Before I do, though, in talking about the Marine Corps ready, relevant, and lethal capabilities that we're bringing to the Indo-Pacific, just want to harp on something. You probably heard through all of the speakers today what I would call a bit of rhyming. And while it might sound like we stole each other's speaker notes from the opening session there, all through all of the speakers, it's because of the JOTI, because of the joint focus that we've had, we're actually all starting to come into focus. So what you're starting to see is we are realizing that we're all going the same way at the same time, so it's actually time to start joining forces. And just like Baxter starts talking about, is now let's pick best of breed. Let's pick who's going to lead in a certain realm, and let's spend money there instead of all of us spending money at disparate entities and disparate capabilities that are not going to be joined to the joint force in the long run. We can no longer afford to do that. We are resource constrained. So as we look at the Indo-Pac and we look at our future, we have to sometimes take a bit of an appetite suppressant across each one of the services to realize the best joint way forward is with, in the aviation domain, probably looking to our Air Force brothers. For the Marine Corps, fully recognizing that the naval domain in the Indo-Pacific is probably going to be the lead. So how do we leverage some of those capabilities? How do we keep a focus there so that, again, we put our best foot forward as we look into this theater? Thanks for the opportunity to join the forum today. I'll just iterate first off with, it's kind of where Satan went. It was really during the post-Cold War period for the maritime forces in the Indo-Pacific, we were largely uncontested. And because we were uncontested, it let us actually focus on power projection and other regimes that the nation and our naval forces actually needed. And while we did that, we did it unfettered from actually investing in any of the capability that we're seeing as a necessary need for us now, for sea control in Indo-Pacific. How does power projection as well affect sea control in that regime? And we're learning some of the lessons that we allowed to wane over the years. What we're seeing right now, though, is in fact an increasingly contested operating environment that is, in the Indo-Pac, a return to the norm. This is what we saw all through the 80s, across all of our careers. So while it seems like an anomaly now, and why are we having to do this new type of warfare? This is what we all grew up with. So here's an opportunity for us to leverage the experience that we've had across careers, hundreds of years of experience, and let's get back into thwarting these peer-level threats. Today we are facing some very high-end tech-enabled adversaries, long-range precision munitions supported with some very competent C5 ISRT that can hold our marine amphibious forces, our naval forces, our air and army forces at distance, at risk, at ranges well beyond anything that we could strike from or that we can even get close to striking from. And that technology is advancing at a rate and a cycle that can be very, very short. And then when you match it up with AI and machine learning algorithms, runs nearly instantaneous, making penetration of these defenses now and into the future not only expensive, but nearly impossible unless, again, we start thinking about this from a joint warfighting, coalition warfighting perspective. So the warfighting advantages that we've had as the United States over the past couple of decades not only are challenged, they really are eroding by these rising peer adversaries, not just in the Indo-Pac, but around the globe. And what I would tell you is I think victory for us in the future is going to require a much more capable, mature, lethally minded warrior who's a critical thinker, able to assess advantage in any and every domain, and then take bold initiative. We understand that we're actually going to be in a denied, degraded environment. We're going to be sectored off, and it is going to be lower echelon commanders who are going to have to take that bold action for us to be successful. We talk about the maneuverist mindset. Can we do that? Do we trust ourselves to be able to do that in the next generation warfare at the fleet level and below? I tell you that our Commandant recognized this new paradigm for warfare early in his tenure, coming back into vogue. And to meet this challenge, not only has he generated the force design concepts, but he's pushed TCOM into now being the fast follow on these and generating a capability to generate the future force, if you will, and develop some very advanced training and education forum in conjunction with the joint partners for the future. So his initiatives, I think, capture what the inside force is. And Admiral Khan mentioned it, so we're talking about things like the Marine Littoral Regiment. You've probably heard that, and I will tell you some folks have taken that to be, so the Marine Corps has now become a small recon, counter-recon force that will operate inside the Philippine archipelago to thwart our peer-level adversary in the Indo-Pac. That is one more arrow that is in the quiver of the Marine warfighting continuum. We will continue to be the Naval Expeditionary Force in readiness at sea, as well as do high-end warfighting. So when we talk about what the MLR brings, it is something that for the COCOM commander in the Indo-Pacific gives them the ability to hold at risk day in and day out our peer-level adversary with high-end sensing, part of a joint environment, connecting kill chains or being ready to connect kill chains across the joint force, not just from any shooter to any sensor, but from best sensor to best shooter, connected through the best C2 architecture to the best decision maker, and as well recognizing that magazines, reload, and capability to remain hidden in the environment are going to be important to us. So can we make the right decisions in this battle space in the future across the joint force? I'll tell you, the Marine Corps that we want to build is going to be purposely in line with the NDS, the CNO's concepts for distributed maritime operations, as well as the sub-concepts of EABO and Loki, as well as being the critical lever, I think, for joint opening of the theater in the future for the entire joint force. The bottom line, though, is that I'll tell you that we are not organized nor equipped. We're getting to the equipped piece, but we're not trained for the A2D or A2AD world of 2030. And with this shift back into great power competition and a renewed focus on the Indo-Pacific, here's where we're seeing our challenges. How do we train to expeditionary, long-range precision fires? How do we connect a kill chain from one element of the joint force to the other? Can you do a hypersonic from one force to the other? Can you link that across several shooters? Do we have the terrestrial and the space-based systems to actually give us both a PNT and a communications architecture that is resilient and redundant so that when we are degraded and denied in a very high EW environment, can we still persist, exist, and then strike the threat at the time and place of our choosing? Do we have the medium to long-range air defense capability that we're going to need? If we're going to set up an EABO in the future, we cannot put Marines or the joint force in harm's way with no way to protect them. So we're investing that capability, but those are significant ranges that we're going to employ those assets at. How are you going to do that? Other than at White Sands missile range and in a couple of places maybe in the knitter. It's going to take a new training paradigm. It's going to take a new training range for the future to be able to do that. We have to exercise mobility and maneuver at sea and ashore. We have to pay some attention to contested logistics. We have let logistics wane into the background for way too long. If we're going to operate in the Indo-Pac, I'll tell you, the old adage of professionals talk logistics is going to come home to roost huge if we don't get ahead of it. As well, we need to think about how we're going to incorporate all of the C5 ISRT that's going to be available. How do we leverage that against the adversary, and how do we make that an advantage for us? I'll tell you that we're trying to translate these concepts and capabilities into a training continuum for the future. And I think, like my partners to my right and to my left have iterated, this really boils down to something that in the Marine Corps we're calling Project Tripoli, which is that live virtual constructive training environment where we'll integrate both live fire ranges, our training areas, our immersive training, simulators, simulation, network command and control, our systems, applications, and the architecture. We believe that this allows us to train from any geographic space inside or on the globe, which is what we know we're going to need to do when we're doing distributed maritime operations anyway. We'll all be able to participate in the same training event and operate with the opportunity to employ all of our advanced training systems at full fidelity of capability with a multi-tiered classification system and at full range. So gone are the times where you're going to have to white card some of our systems, and folks don't even want to come play in your exercise because they're not getting to actually play, the F-35's full capabilities out there. So why would I even come to your exercise? Now we're talking about enclave level capabilities where, again, these assets play to their own level of capability. The effects are then metered into the overarching exercise. I don't need to know how the asset did what it did, but I do need to know what it did to the adversary and what advantage it provided to me. Our LVCT is intended to provide a persistent network in conjunction with the Navy Continuous Training Network and the joint training networks out there that are part of the JOTI as we move to the future. We've also got to have our coalition partners on board. We heard this morning that it's no one of us is as smart as all of us. It's the joint and coalition partners, though, that bring certain capabilities that do not reside in the U.S. arsenal. And if we don't recognize that and learn how to leverage those, again, we're going to be a hollow force when we go against a very advanced Chinese threat. But we need to be able to replicate the warfighting environment against this great power competitor and fully rehearse and train to our warfighting concepts. The old adage of the Corps still rings true today, though, that the strength of our Corps is the Marine. It's not all of these training systems that we have out there, and we're going to equip the Marine, not man the equipment. And it's going to be the increased lethality of our next generation of weapons and changes to the organization that won't meet their promise unless we actually train the Marines and educate them better than we have in the past. In this lane, I will tell you that the Marine Corps is going to invest very, very heavily in professional military education and instructional and immersive systems to put them in a better position to leverage these capabilities for the joint force in the future. So our new Training Education 2030 document that's coming out here shortly is going to talk about how we're going to make a Marine that is ready and capable of fighting and winning in the Indo-Pac in 2030 and beyond. And while it is a target for the Marine Corps in 2030, we're not rushing to meet that deadline. Nor will we step back from any of our responsibilities for high-end warfighting or being the nation's, okay, I'll be a little bold here, best crisis response 9/11 force in readiness anywhere on the globe, anytime. So I welcome your thoughts, your innovative ideas, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
All right, so Major General Ann Miller, Director Training Readiness, half A3T. First, Ms. Baxter, thanks for your leadership, bringing the joint force together to talk about these very important discussions. I'll tell you, I'm a little bit surprised that the Navy wasn't successful with the Air Force in the football game because you stole my notes. I don't know why you didn't steal our game plan. But,
go Navy!
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with what the Admiral and the General have just said. So not to get repetitive too much, but the adversary has been watching us since Desert Storm, saw how we are executing and how we are the best force out there, joint force out there, and they have designed a force to counter us and hold, as the General just said, our forces at risk, at distance. And that is our challenge, right? So now we find ourselves in an environment where we have to disaggregate to survive and aggregate to be lethal. And to do that is going to require a joint force that is interdependent, as the Admiral just said. We are relying upon our sister services as much as they are relying upon us for that air superiority. In that vein, the Air Force has also recognized that this rapidly advancing adversary that we have is much different than the fight that we've been fighting since the fall of the Berlin Wall, right? That counter VEO is a much lower threshold, and we were able to be very efficient in the ways that we did things because the adversary, frankly, was not all that skilled and very low end, and we could afford to be efficient with just-in-time, as the General said, logistics and just-in-time training and a global force management posture that was able to be very efficient in the way we did things because the level of readiness that was required for those fights was frankly very low. The Air Force has recognized this in the way that we have been monitoring our readiness, And we have just gone through a mission essential task. Every single mission essential task in the Air Force has been rewritten with the focus on the pacing challenge, with the conditions and standards that are required to meet that adversary. And so when we start assessing in January using these new METs, we fully expect to see that there's probably gaps that need to be filled, that we'll be relying upon our industry partners here to help us get those. And that's capability gaps and capacity gaps, as well as training gaps, which is very important to this particular audience. So the Air Force, if you were here last year, I talked a lot about our approach for the Common Synthetic Training Environment. We have now chosen that environment. It is the Joint Simulation Environment. It's the F-35 OT&E environment, which is very important. One, it's government-owned, it's physics-based, and it's at levels of classification that we need to in order to be able to protect our TTPs from the adversary. As was mentioned previously, we are shifting to the synthetic environment because of range limitations, airspace limitations, and OPSEC concerns, that we're now shifting the way the Air Force is doing its training on its head. We're now doing our high-end training in the synthetic environment and doing what we call our admin training or our admin flying, which is still very important. So don't get me wrong, we are not replacing a flying hour with a simulation hour. We are augmenting it to get a much better product on the back end. We are sending our weapons school to Pax River to leverage JSE that's there, and they are saying that our F-35 weapons school that goes there are saying it is the best training, bar none, that they get. They can get 40 different vols in a week-long period by going in the sim, coming out, debriefing, briefing, going in the sim, debriefing. They do that for an entire week, get 40 vols. It would take the entire syllabus of the weapons. Weapons school is the Top Gun of the Air Force. So it's the premier instructors in the Air Force that go to the weapons school, and in the F-35 community, we're sending them to the JSE environment at Pax River. We're standing up the virtual test and training center at Nellis, as the Admiral mentioned, and there is plans to connect it with Fallon for that joint interoperability training that we'd have. Right now, it's F-35, incorporating F-22 into it, with plans now to incorporate more Night 1 forces into that virtual test and training center. Again, physics-based, government-owned, and that's key. Where industry comes into this is how do we do things that JSE doesn't currently do today? So multi-level security. So everybody that gets into JSE today has to be briefed into the F-35 program. Okay, yeah, we can brief a whole bunch of people in, but when we start talking about, bringing 4th gen forces in or whatnot, like the general said, I don't need everybody to know exactly how something happened. I just need to be able to see the effect happening, but maybe not attribute it to what the cause of that effect was. And so multi-level security is something that I'm very interested in incorporating into JSE because of the ability to incorporate more forces into it. I was just on a panel just prior to this one, and General Bratton, who is the Space Force counterpart to General Alvin this morning, was also on it. They're also looking at JSE as a potential platform to join in on because of the space effects that the forces that are going to be in JSE rely upon and be able to get that training, realistic training in that environment. We go to other environments, they're proprietary, where you get a lot of good training that already incorporate other forces into it. But I'll tell you, to go there, it's in the 7 figures to pay for that every week that you want to use those facilities. So that's why we're very interested in getting after a government-owned solution for that. The other thing the Air Force is doing is called the Air Force Force Generation. It's the way we present our forces, and it's acknowledging that we need that time to do that training. So the way the Air Force is presenting forces is a 6-month available to commit phase, which is when forces would deploy. When they come back from that, they go into a 6-month reset phase. That's when you do, in a perfect world, you start doing a lot of your modernization of your aircraft, your PCSs, things of that nature. Maybe you go to professional development of some sort. Then you get in the next 6 months is your prepare phase. You start a crawl, walk, run approach to increasing readiness as you go around the phases. Then the last 6 months before you're available to commit is the ready phase, and you start getting into more integrated, interoperable type training, and you actually get to a certification event, much like our joint partners do, which the Air Force has not been doing, is a certification event to say that this force element is now prepared. This is going to change the way that we present training in all of those different phases. Some is individualized training, some is unit training, some is interoperable training with other forces within the Air Force as well as our joint partners. But that's the approach that the Air Force has taken to acknowledge that we need to raise the level of readiness to be ready for a peer adversary, which we have frankly not had for decades, and acknowledge that we need to adjust our training accordingly with both giving bandwidth and time to do it, as well as the systems that we are going to be doing that training in. And it's just an honor to be here with this austere panel, and I look forward to your questions.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Chuck Lombardo, and really, Secretary Baxter, thanks for having me here with you, with this incredible team. We're kind of talking through right now in the Army, what are we looking at for the Army of 2030, the training environment. And so as we look at this, I kind of want to address it in the training environment, the methodology, and the training audience. To quote the current chairman in our 38th Chief Joe Milley, he talked about, we really want to raise the rigor of our training to be that lip-quivering, jaw-dropping, seminal training event. And we really aim to do that as we've taken the lessons learned from the last 40, 50 years that we've done to build home station training, the Combat Training Center program, and really what we've learned Russia, Ukraine, and informing that 7th Army Training European Training Command to form and build out a JPMRC, an Indo-Pacific training capability for General Flynn as he supports, and really the Secretary as we enable the joint force in the Pacific. And we also want to do that, with some data centricity. We leave a lot of training on the floor. The results of it, how do we capture and take all that training and that joint training environment to inform the readiness, the collective readiness that we're building. So one of the big things we're working on is, and I'm really thankful for PIMTech and some of the capabilities that they're starting to bring to JPMRC, is the notion of a persistent training environment. It's an analogy, we're building it in Europe, but how do we better build that and really give time back to our leaders in a training environment where we build exercises once and access it multiple times. So we just finished a core warfighter with USERPAC as the higher headquarters exercise director controlling it. And I believe we were working with the MEF and a lot of our joint force. It's the first time we've ever done that. Multiple corps, divisions, and now our allies and partners. How do we continue to take that with the two recent JPMRC brigade rotations in Alaska and Hawaii, and take those capabilities and then expand into our allies and partners in a similar manner that we did our 30 partners in Europe. And so those are the things we're working on right now from a training audience perspective. How do we expand that? The Army's also at this point, we started in the mid-'80s with the brigade training rotations at the National Training Center at Fort Polk, JRTC. A few years later, we built our Mission Command Training Program that trained in a constructive methodology, the divisions and corps. And this year, we're getting ready to start our second iteration of a division live rotation at the National Training Center, really testing the battlefield framework, integrating MDTF, the SFAB, the Security Force Assistance Brigade. It really stretches China Lake all the way back into the back parts of NTC to really put a division on its heels a couple hundred miles by 90. Thinking through that space and how do we transfer that type of battlefield framework to the Pacific, and where can we train that, and so that'll be a good rotation. And then as the Army steps up the division as a decisive form of maneuver, that critical formation, and we bring up from the BC, the brigade combat team, to the division. That's one of the big things that we're working on right now. And we think that's also got to be joint and allied. I mean, we're never going to train alone. And we started to do that at the battalion and brigade level in our home station training and in our combat training center program. We absolutely want to do that at the division and corps, and we see that as another capability. We think the secret sauce in all of this is those training commands. So 7th ATC, if you look back at then Brigadier General Goudeau standing up the Joint Multinational Training Group Ukraine, the power of that and getting our allies and the seed corn of training of capability that built for the Ukrainian leaders and those soldiers back in 14 to 16 has really come to bear over the last year as we near that first year in that conflict. How do we transition that into the Pacific and to be ready to and built for purpose and be able to fight tonight and that credible force that the Secretary charges us with? How do we take those lessons learned, that secret sauce, to drive and embolden our partners and allies? And that's what we're working on in the Pacific, and how we arm General Flynn with the capability for USAPAC to be able to take on, to bring in the allies and partners, and to train that in an expeditionary manner. So it's going to, the geography is a bit different, Europe to Pacific. So how do we build a mobile, expeditionary, but scalable training capability that'll serve us not just a BCT and not just a theater security cooperation type mission, but to really enable the joint force and make it a unit of trust or a unit of choice. People want to come to that exercise because from the F-35 to the private on the ground, at whatever magazine you're using, there's some benefit of training. It's going to build readiness somewhere, and we just can't. I think all of us have said collectively we cannot handle the redundancy, or we can't waste that training. In the height of the counterinsurgency fight, we had 32 joint centers of excellence that said that they did IED defeat. I don't think the joint force can afford to build 32 MDO centers of excellence, if you will, that'll get after their individual JADC2 decision dominance, whatever platitude you're going to write it out as. It's the same thing. We want to be able to decide faster, assimilate and put that sensor to shooter in a quicker manner. The other thing we're working is how do we pull back the line of departure, if you will, for our training exercises. In the last 50 years, we've driven or railed, loaded air to the little CTC rotation in the Dust Bowl or the confines of Fort Polk or in Bavaria, and the rotation started there. Today, we are really working with our threat systems, operations, and some of our MDO capabilities to really from port to fort to port to get there. So the training environment, the training task, it starts at Fort Hood, Texas. So if you have your cell phone on and your OPSEC violations, or if you leave your RFID tag on your Bradley, you're going to receive fires in that first day of combat. And then we're trying to really raise the EMS literacy rates of the Army to think about that. To think about the cyber, the SEMA, the EW traffic, and the signatures that you're providing. That means something. It's not lost on the Army that 38 Brigade Tactical Group headquarter command posts have been destroyed in Russia. I mean, we've got 31 active BCTs in the Army. We can't afford to take that type of losses, and notwithstanding the 20-something general officers that have been destroyed, killed, or taken out in combat. So we are really trying to step up our EMS signatures. We've done it for the last 5-6 years at the brigade level. This year we're starting to pull the division and corps, not just in the constructive fight, but put them in the live setting, and to look at the EMS signatures of those large command posts that we grew in the coin era 2000, to get those to be able to hide in plain sight and think about what it looks like from an EMS perspective. To get a tactical command post. How do you get a division command post to look similar to the brigade, that looks similar to maybe a task force, to get them smaller, agile, to be able to jump them in 4 to 6 minutes. The first time we did, I think, a division wet gap crossing out in Europe, it took 20 hours to conduct. By their 20th iteration, they had gotten that down to 40 minutes. And so as we look at the science of this, we've got to take those lessons learned from troop company battery all the way up to the ASCC and division and corps, and that's kind of what we're working on to increase that rigor. I guess where we're going, the bottom line, it's a persistent training environment that we build the exercises once, we access it multiple times, it's distributed, it's a scalable training environment, so we could do it like a Talisman Sabre, or it could be a corps level warfighter, and it shouldn't require the overhead of 500 risk reduction man hours and to send the entire enterprise to set up that training event. what we really need, I think, help from industry is how do we help us build from a modeling in sims or an exercise design, build that once, retain it, and help us really take those lessons learned, that after action review, which is the most important part of our training environment, the plan, prep, execute, the assessment phase. How do we take those assessments to drive the training of that, and transfer that readiness to that next cohort or that next command as they transfer on in our rearm model. That's all I have right now. I look forward for the questions. Thanks for allowing us to be here, and I appreciate it.
I'm Brigadier General Mike J.D. Drowley from Indo-Pacom. On behalf of the entire Indo-Pacom team and Admiral Aquilino, aloha to everyone. Thanks for having me here and being able to talk with the team. Prior to going out to be the J7 at Indo-Pacom, I was the 57th Wing Commander out of Nellis Air Force Base. And so pretty lucky from that standpoint because I had the opportunity to really participate, take part in, lead, train the advanced training for the Air Force. And that's our weapons school, red flag, and those type of large force exercises. The J7 stood up about 3 or 4 months prior to me showing up to take over as the 7. And really, it's just more of everything. It's more joint, more partners, more distance, when you look at what it is that we've been charged to do out in the Indo-Pacific. And so the guiding principles that Admiral Aquilino gave to us really are nested under the National Defense Strategy when you look at integrated defense and campaigning, and then his orders to think, act, and operate differently. And so that's really what we are trying to embody when you look at the J7 and how we're divided, and really the marching orders that we've received and how we're going to go about trying to ensure that our team is ready for whatever conflict or crisis may be down the road for us. And so when you look at the J7, there's really 3 divisions for us. The 7-1 is our exercises. And that is to try and make sure that the scrimmage is as much like the game as possible. If there is a single airman, rifleman, soldier, sailor, guardian, when the flag goes up that looks at themselves in the mirror and goes, I'm not ready for this, then we failed. And so it is to try and make that as replicative, as realistic as possible as we can when it comes to putting on exercises. And that's to get our partners involved, to ensure that we have command and control, we can communicate, we understand what the environment is like. And so because I've been the 57th Wing Commander, I have been lucky enough to get a number of hours over the Nevada Test and Training Range, down to 29 Palms, over the National Training Center. Phenomenal ranges with exquisite capabilities, but they are not in the 2nd and 1st Island chain. They do not allow us to be up front and provide that integrated deterrence. And so that is what our Pacific Multi-Domain Training Experimentation capability, the J72 PIMTech, is trying to afford us. It is to give us capabilities that allows us to provide integrated deterrence forward without degrading our readiness. And so to be able to do that, we need command and control, we need deployable range complexes. So when everybody asks, like, hey, what is it you need? What is it industry can provide to you? It needs to be mobile, it needs to be forward, and it needs to provide us command and control and things that can replicate our ability to exercise in the fight. So when you look at PEMTech and the evolution, we're on about our 3rd year right now. And as we move forward, we're approaching IOC as we get into 23. The first 2 years, we're really shoring up the backside infrastructure, the people, the communication, the pipes, and really to those exquisite high-end ranges that we have, the Nevada Test and Training Range, the Joint Pacific-Alaska Range Complex, JPARC, and those type of facilities so we could train and get the high-end exquisite training and a lot of the LVC, the live virtual constructive capabilities that we'll need. As we move forward into 23, the name of the game is west of the international date line. That is where I've got to get. I've got to move forward and I've got to get into that space and allow us to get training through our exercises where we can still maintain readiness. And so as we continue on, that is really what we're doing. And like Ms. Baxter talked about, from the standpoint of needing it now, I'm in MacGyver mode. So like I'm just trying to get things to interconnect, and if it is widget A that allows Army system to talk to Air Force system, then that's a win, and let's move forward. And so really one eyeball is on the here and now, and what gives me the biggest return on investment that I can possibly get, while the other eyeball is outside the fight up and going, okay, what can we build long term now that is enduring, that continues to give us a good, better, best model as you look at how we try and move forward with our exercises and our simulations and those types of things. And when you look at it, it really is a whole of staff effort on the Indo-PACOM side. So I have to work with the 8 as they do our budgeting and provide us experimentation. Our 6 is essential in this for communication. So when you talk about not only security levels between partners, but just the communication platforms between services and now the communication platforms between partners, the mission partner environment to be able to interconnect across all those different equities, be able to dial the security where you need it, so those enclaves are shored up. Really, it's their own, I would say, line of effort and center of gravity within that. The 3 helps put all those operations tied together. Our 5 plans informed us, and then the 2 make sure that we are exercising scenarios that are realistic and could be a potential someday. So that is what the whole staff is geared toward, to the point of, again, where the 7 efforts are really within the top 3 of the Indo-PACOM priorities of what it is that we're trying to do as we move forward. To be able to fill in all the areas in between the 7.1 and the 7.2 is where our 7.3 comes in providing modeling, simulation, and wargaming. So again, we can make sure that we have the fidelity that says, hey, when we do move A, what do we think the counter move is going to be, or what impact is that going to have, or what is the force flow going to look like to ensure that's as realistic as possible. One of the lessons learned that we've taken away from high-end training is if you have a bad simulation, it is almost worse than just not doing it at all. And so we want to make sure that it is accurate as it can possibly be to ensure that we have good form as we hit the repetitions that we need to hit to ensure this gets done. And so really from going through all the different services is they have their charters to organize, train, and equip. On the Indo-PACOM side, with the pacing challenge that we have, we try and bring all of that together now to meet the commander's intent, so that way we can nest under our national defense strategy and bring it home. And so I look forward to your questions and inputs. And ma'am, I'll hand it back over to you.
All right. Join me in giving them a round of applause before we begin. All right, I've gotten a couple questions so far. Thank you, keep it coming. I'm going to moderate a couple questions myself without falling off the stage. So please find a card and fill it out. I want to talk about this interdependency idea, and this is a question to all the panelists, and so jump in as you see fit. As we're driving towards this interdependency model, it's more than just interoperable, it's interdependent. There are obviously a lot of commonalities of approaches that we've heard about, which is great. So let me ask you this, what is the biggest mistake that you could make, your service or us, DoD potentially, could make right now to throw off where we seem to be heading? General Hines, you mentioned that we're kind of past the point of recognizing interoperability is important. We're all kind of aligned now. So how do we screw it up? Anyone can go first. Of course. Hit it.
Be bold or go home. I would say it's going back to a proprietary mindset. Picking up something that a service thinks is going to be the war winner in a domain or from a service perspective, and then you start to lose essentially the perspective that we are a joint force. We're going to have to fight as a joint force, and if you pick a vendor or a capability that is not going to apply across all of the domains or to all of the services, you're pigeonholing actually yourself into failure. And if we know that no one of us is going to survive without all of us, it's not that you're going to be the leader, you're going to be the first to fall, because the rest of the joint force is probably actually already all synced up with a software integration module or something else that's going to be able to blend those capabilities, and essentially you stepped out of line and you just became the target. So what I would say is our biggest failure is not recognizing that we got to play team ball now. So it's there's software integration. We're past where we were with hardware integration, and that interoperability actually meant that we had to all buy the same thing from one individual or one vendor. We can do far better than that now. So we just need to talk more, integrate more across the services, and then work through DoD at that level. So again, we provide a unified front.
I think the only thing I would add is in terms of creating that training environment that's reliable, realistic, relevant, and recordable at the various individual unit and integrated levels. Recordable is where intellectual honesty is put up front, egos are left at the door, and that's where you have learning. And trust me, there's some pretty big egos that you got to be left at the door. I think a mistake we could make is thinking that training will solve all our problems. It won't. We need to continue to make the investments to drive simplicity down to the tactical edge. That means significant and real warfighting advantages in the hands of our men and women that are in those airplanes, on those ships, in those submarines, Marines on the ground, SEALs in the water. I mean, those investments have to be made. And that's where the tough choices are going to have to be made. Today's readiness, future modernization. Modernizations today is future readiness. So how we square that corner and live within our means and realize that we're going to have to make some difficult choices. LVC, I'm in. But more, it can't be just simply a more is better approach. It has to be able to be measured how it's moving the warfighting needle. Comment made about JSE. Navy is into the JSE. But I'm also open for some effects-based. Virtual reality is playing a big difference down in our training command. Some gaming technology. There is a place at some individual levels. We don't, physics-based, we need it for TTP development, publication, and competence and confidence of warfighters. But sometimes effects-based will be good enough. So I want to make sure at least industry hears that at the right place.
Admiral, I couldn't agree more on that last statement. And one place where we may diverge just slightly is on the LVC conversation. So when the Air Force is making tough choices on where we're going to spend our next dollar, right now we are focusing very much on the synthetic environment. While LVC has great promise, when we're looking at prioritizing where we're going to spend our money, we're going to focus first on where we want to get the most out of it is in the synthetic environment for our Night 1 high-end training. And if we ever get to the point where we have money to do both, LVC would be next in line, is I guess what I'd say. To the general's point, I can't agree more of one of the biggest mistakes we can make is going down the hardware-defined path for some solution. This is a world of software-defined solutions, and we need to go down that path. And I'd say where industry can help us is making sure that we get to a more cohesive or interdependent or interoperable data standards for the things that we do. Part of the reasons we're going down parallel paths and hopefully not divergent paths, as the Admiral said, is because the data that we use is not the same data across the services. If I were able to go back in time, I would start creating data standards 30 years ago, and we'd be that much further ahead and more interdependent and interoperable. So from this point forward, what we need from industry is help on data standards so that we can take from parallel to more convergent paths on solutions going forward, because the data is the same across the joint force.
I think, quickly, I agree. But I've never been scared in a simulator, but I've been scared in an airplane. And there's differences. And there's a certain amount of air sense or sea sense that's going to have to be developed in the live world. I think you would agree with that. We can fight sound the knockoff, the kids can knock it out of the park, but then we break things and kill people to and from the fight. And so there's a certain number of air under backside and saltwater under keels that we need to give to our warfighters in the future. So this is a balanced question.
I think we can't be afraid to fail, and we have to really run our stuff hard through the training, the experimentation, the testing. I mean, look, we all have iPhone like 14s or 13s. From 3 to 14 was about 2 FIDEFs. I mean, we'd be standing around waiting for perfect. We got to be able to take kit, practice it, run it through. If it doesn't work, chuck it aside. And just like the gentleman talked about, leaving the egos at the door, be willing to do that and not wait on a long, like 5-year plan that's going to have a full basis of issue to the Army. We're trying to work that, and then we're thankful for some of the PIMTech capabilities that drive us to being more like that, so we can test the latest capability and be used in a more fungible manner some of the threat systems out there to drive our training.
Yeah, I just would reiterate inter-domain and inter-service, inter-partner. It's got to be all three of those things. So every time there's a piece of information, what is the best way that it can get shared? Whether it came from space, how do you get it to the maritime component? If it came from the maritime component, how do you get it to the land component? Every system that comes on board, we're going to want it talking to everything else. That's how you make the web. And if it's not being built with that type of intended purpose in mind, with some of the existing systems that we already have, then I think that would be the biggest mistake we could make right now.
Thank you. This is for our service representative, brethren. As we've been talking about interdependencies, I wanted to poke at the tension you might feel between your Title X responsibility to man, train, and equip the best sailors, airmen, and Marines and soldiers you can, while also keeping the goal of interdependency, interoperability in your sightline. Do you feel that there is a trade space of risk in that equation, and how would you characterize it?
Yeah.
Admiral
Yeah, I'll start. I'm not sure if I'll hit the mark, though. You know, as a young F-14 pilot, I had to know one job, how to fly that F-14. Yeah, I need to know a little bit about the E-2 that was providing some control, but I really didn't need to know much about what some of our ships were doing. That world has changed, and the young kids today, they need to understand more than their platform. Not down to the excruciating detail of knowing your machine cold, whether it flies, floats, or underwater, or in space, for goodness sake. But we're asking a lot of these young people today in terms of level of expertise that they need. And the more and more we take that approach, we got to make sure that we don't become a bunch of generalists when, in fact, we need specialists doing certain things. So if that's a risk in this discussion, I would raise that.
And I would say, no, it's not a risk, and we ought to value the fact that we have soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, Guardians, because it's diversity of perspective. I think we embrace diversity as we're going forward, and it's going to be all of those different perspectives are from across the service that are then unified after we've made those individuals as to how they employ in the joint space. So we have a continuum of training. So when we mint a Marine coming off of or make a Marine coming off of the drill field, that's not where it ends. Okay, we have a sustaining the transformation on how we keep them as a Marine, but then we train them, and all of the skill sets are going to be necessary. So if they're a young F-18 pilot like when I grew up, just like Satan's talking about, gone are the days where you just talk about how you're going to employ inside your squadron. You have to have an eye to how does your aircraft, your unit, employ in support of the overarching battle space. You know, I didn't know what an ATO was when I was first growing up until I got thrust into the joint battle space in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. You learn quickly then, and then you didn't walk away from it. But at the same time, we were still raising youngsters who didn't know what an ATO was. We have changed all of that. Our training paradigms now, as we start to teach MOS skills, military occupational skills, are inclusive of the joint environment as we move forward. And then when we get to unit level training and service level training, it is absolutely at the joint level. There will be a service flavor to that, but it is how is that service employing in support of the joint force. You cannot play the games anymore where, hey, I'm going to exercise the Marine Corps and I'm going to fight the entirety of the Chinese horde by myself in the Indo-Pacific. If you're not partnering with the Air Force for the air domain, the sea domain, and then sharing in the land domain with my partner down the table, you fail. You don't have the capacity or the capability to fight that adversary. So you are forced, I think logically you would choose that option to become more of a joint player.
So I agree with what the Admiral and the General have said. And the Air Force is taking an approach to all domain operations, as we call it. And so it's Air University, all domain operations is being incorporated into the intermediate developmental education programs. Weapons school is working it into the weapons school programs. So we recognize that we have to train and educate the force in order to be interoperable, interdependent, you pick whichever nuanced word you want. But it is exactly as they've said, it is the only way that we're going to be able to fight. And we owe our airmen, and I would say all service members, that training and education so that they know what they're getting into. It's not like the day of old where we could be completely oblivious to things. But I also agree with, we need that F-35 pilot to be an F-35 specialist. We need the F-22 pilot to be the specialist, and we need the logistician to be a logistician specialist. There's that balance that I couldn't agree more on.
And I think, in the Army, we're reconciling that mastery, what it requires, the 6 years it requires to build a tanker that can fight his Abrams or her Abrams tank and knows where to move it, flow with the water, if you will, through the terrain. But also be cognizant of the world's not slowing down. The OE is much more complex. As you move into a support by fire, there's a counter drone swarm, there's EMW, you're being jammed, so you have to fight the complete pace plan. So you have to be masters of your networks and understand when you're silhouetting from an EMS, just from a physical on a piece of an intervisibility line. And I think we have to continue to train that hard, but we have to prioritize because we can't be great at everything at all the times. And so I think as an Army, we're trying to really focus our training, but replicate the realistic training environment that they're going to face, whether it's the Second Island Chain or the Salwiki Gap in Europe. That's what we have to replicate to give them, as we talked about, that tougher scrimmage before they get out there. But I think it is something we have to reconcile. I don't think it's something we compromise. So.
All right. I want to just pull the thread on organization. You've each spoken about this a little bit, but could you talk through how you are organized for training and how you've changed your organization and your training to adapt from 20 years of coin to the coming fight?
I'll be brief. I think it was about 6 years ago. The aviation community and the Navy, we pretty much stole what the Air Force was doing, after the Alt report and stood up our weapons schools. And so we had NAUTIC, the Aviation Warfighting Development Center, and then in 2014 we stood up the Surface and Mine Warfighting Development Center, and we a few years ago stood up the Intelligence Warfare Warfighting Development Center, the Undersea Warfighting Development Center. So these are the specialists that own that domain. But when you have these operational problems of long-range fires, interdependencies, it causes them to have conversations that I didn't have when I was their age. Instead of stovepiped cylinders of excellence, we're now having conversations that are horizontal. And that better fields them to solve some of these hard operational problems. They don't have to solve it all themselves. They can look where the strengths are across the force, and they're more knowledgeable and better suited to come up with more realistic options.
A couple things, and we talked about it. We've moved from the brigade back to the division as really the unit charged with driving the training and readiness. But we're also looking at how we've actually stolen the Army, stealing a little bit of maybe the Navy, the pilots, the aviation RL progression. It's one of the areas we're starting this year of transferring readiness. We're realizing from our personnel tempo, op tempo, we can't start at fleet 0 and retrain every soldier and unit. In our regionally aligned modernization rearm, you have to arrive, and we're taking your training experiences from the past and moving you to that level, that RL progression, if you will. And so we're not starting from fleet 0. And so I think we're using some of that to better inform. And so to do that, though, we need more data centricity so we can capture the training experiences of our soldiers as they arrive. I also think we've used our 17 LISCO gaps a few years back. We kind of laid that out. And as it pertains to the Pacific, the Joint Contested Logistics, that's starting to drive our behavior of how we train. And so, from a tactical foundational training strategy, we've hit some stuff, but we're also, how do we train at the higher echelon, and especially as we support the Joint Force and Indo-PACOM? How do we better position ourselves to compete and rapidly transition from competition to crisis is something else we're kind of working on.
So as I mentioned in my opening comments, the Air Force is shifting to the AF4Gen model on how we present forces. And part of that is we present forces now as force elements. And for the Agile Combat Support, this is one of the major changes. So it used to be when we would deploy, and this goes to the context changer, right? We had the luxury of being able to deploy one airman as an entity. They get downrange and they finally meet the people they're going to work with when they're in the CENTCOM AOR and figure out strengths and weaknesses in the AOR. That's not going to be a viable methodology of presenting forces, especially against a near peer or a peer adversary. So with this AF4Gen phasing cycle, we are now defining our Agile Combat Support force elements that will go through the phases, through the reset, prepare, and ready phase, and that crawl, walk, run. When you get to that run phase, these regionally aligned Agile Combat Support force elements will come together and do exercises and training together. So they figure this out before they're called on in the available to commit phase, and they go downrange in a much more cohesive and better prepared and certified team going forward.
Ma'am, I'll tell you one of the challenges that the Marine Corps had for quite a long time was for man, train, and equip. We had a 3-star on the manning side, we had a 3-star on the equipper side, and on the training side, TCOM was actually a 2-star that was subordinated to the equipper. So you can imagine how you're trying to actually build training systems when they're going to come at the expense of the equipper. Where's the equity for, hey, this is, if I've got an ACOG scope and I know it's going to increase lethality by 17%, I can pay for that and I know what I'm getting out of it. So, Wolfie, what am I getting out of, upgunning your infantry Marine course? It's going to be a more lethal Marine. Well, in what manner and how can you prove it? So, trying to compare some apples to bicycles got very tough in trying to do that. Our Commandant saw that, and what he did is he actually upgunned TCOM. So, I came through as the 2-star at TCOM, and it was exceptionally frustrating. And now I'm back as the 3-star, so I guess there's a level of expectation. Okay, you said you could fix this if there was a 3-star in there. So we have restructured how we're doing training inside the Marine Corps, writ large. And then at some of the smaller nuanced levels, we're training Marines in a different fashion than we have in the past. So there is an alchemy to making a Marine that we consider that a revered methodology of doing that. There was some gut-wrenching when we started talking about how we're going to change how we're making infantrymen for the future. And I will tell you that the infantry Marine course, while it was a tough sell for us to be able to change this, we knew we needed to make cognitive changes. We needed them to be more maneuverous than they already were in the past. And as we've done that, and what we've done is instead of doing essentially an industrial age model where there's 300 individuals in a classroom, we actually have one staff NCO that sits down with 14 Marines and mentors them through the entire infantry course. What I would tell you is what you end up with is a soft-like operator at the end of 8 weeks that you look at the old model that we were using to train Marines and the new model that we're using to train Marines, and they're entirely different. And you actually have someone that when the 3-star walks up and would normally ask a PFC, hey, how's the training going, would shrink like a violet and not know what to say. I've got 3 of them that turn to me and start asking me questions. So when we're engaging now this new generation and giving them the opportunity to be far more than we ever expected of them in the past, they're actually rising to the occasion, and I think they're going to be the cognitive overmatch that we actually need out there for the future. The last thing that we're doing is we've traded our live fire and maneuver out at 29 Palms for a large section of force-on-force maneuvering, commander v. commander, with a live operating adversary force out there that we have committed to time and time again as part of our large force exercise out there. And I will tell you, it's not consequence-free. when you do have a commander who has decided that he is going to come off the PACE plan or she's going to come off the PACE plan because they're a bit frustrated, because we do put jamming in the environment out there. We take away their PNT, we inject cyber, and we inject info operations that are contrary to their messages. Very quickly, they think that there's going to be probably no ramifications. So they do open their spectrum, and no sooner do they get snowstorm. And the ramification is we pull that commander out of the battle space. We pull their whole headquarters out of the battle space. We move them to zombie land so they no longer participate in the exercise for a significant period of time. And then we watch all of their MSCs flail as their commander made a bad decision that they have to live with. So again, we're pushing harder and harder on making our training environments more replicate of what we think we're going to see in the battle space, and we're making our commanders actually feel the pain when they don't reckon against the adversary we expect to see for the future.
All right, one more question from me, and then we're going to go to your questions. And this is directed at JD. I want to pull on a thread that you mentioned in your opening comments. You have the opportunity to tell directly to the services what Indo-PACOM needs from them. Go for it.
Money.
Now, I think on the good news front, all of the services are trying to get after a lot of the requirements that we have when it comes to joint command and control, the joint fires network, things that we need to be able to do to achieve the mission. On the flip side, what I would say what we really need from the services is we need to move fast, and what Indo-PACOM is looking for is the best of breed. If you were to go to Indo-PACOM and say, hey, is it the advanced battle management system? Is it over, what is it? We're like, we don't care. We just want the best thing as fast as we can get it, is kind of the party line that we have. It would be nice if they can interoperate together, if the services can communicate from the ground up, because that's usually what happens when we get to our level, is we're like, that is a great Army system. Is it talking to the Air Force system? No? Okay, what can we do to help that out? And so if that's built in from the ground level up, then it reduces our workload so we can shift our scan further out. So I'd say the good news is we all have a North Star that we're trying to get towards. Can we get there faster, and can we integrate it earlier in the game plan, bake it in from the ground level up as we move forward?
All right, good stuff. All right, where do you draw the line, this is to everybody, where do you draw the line between training and experimentation with possible future capabilities that do not exist in the near term?
We just finished Project Convergence, and I had the honor as a brigade commander I was part of the network integration evaluation. So it was the brigade the Army had to do experimentation, and so I tried to carry. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do both, and we should do both. We do have to. Every round fired, whether it's live, virtual, constructive, has got to train as many echelons as possible. And I think it's got to train, it can't just be Army, it's got to be joint, it's got to be allied, it's got to be partnered. And so, with our mission command training program, we experiment and we allow, we kind of say, hey, if it's in the FIDEP, you can experiment with it in a constructive fight. We'll let you have your spike missile, you can lay on those effects, and we're gonna leverage that capability. We were testing and experimenting with the MDTF well before they came out into the Army's inventory. And I think we got to continue to do that as we protect our modernization windows. We've got to find those pockets, because it's going to drive probably better O&Os, better doctrine, better concepts, not just for the Army, but for joint concepts and joint doctrine. And so I think we draw the line. We can't violate the training objectives for the primary training audience, but we've got enough capabilities and enough training centers that we can do both, and that's what we're doing today, whether it's at the NTC or abroad.
Others? JB?
Ma'am, I would say our aperture is pretty wide. So if it's a min-viable product, if it gets us something, then we're willing to use it from experimentation into training. And we've got a lot of examples of that already. There was a program out at Nellis that helped us transfer data from sensor to shooter in a much more expedited timeline fashion. I mean, we ran it through one exercise and we said, okay, let's start getting it out to folks. And so, again, we've been charged with moving fast, and so because of that, we're willing to accept a little more risk on the experimentation side to get to training with systems.
When I look at experimentation, from the seat that I sit in now, it is how do I get prototypes to the fleet to experiment with? When you look at what, if you're familiar with what Task Force 59 is doing with some unmanned systems in Fifth Fleet, it's a fleet battle lab to experiment, iterate, and learn before we just decide to scale on a particular widget, whether it be ones and zeros, or whether it be an unmanned air system, a surface system, the sail drones, the other type of things that it's using. And it's also going to start in Fourth Fleet. Because to me, it's about increasing velocity of delivering capability to the fleet. And we need to plug into the experiments that we already have. We don't need to create new ones. In our fleet experiments, into a relevant operational exercise, not just a one-off experiment. Get them into the problem. See how they contribute to solve some of those hard, challenging key operational problems. And let's not let perfection be the enemy of good enough. It's about getting speed and capability of the fleet as quickly as we can.
Agree wholeheartedly, and I would say for us, the lines between test, training, experimentation, tactics development, all of that is blurring significantly. And key to all of this, whether it's live fly or in a synthetic environment, is capturing the data of all of those events and then being able to leverage that data for whatever purpose you want to have it used for, whether that's tactics development or a test purpose or experimentation. It's that data piece and being able to capture that all and know how to use that to the end goal that you have. Agree completely with, you can't have the experimentation overcome the purpose of a test, or I mean a training exercise, but it doesn't mean that it has to be exclusive. We are integrating much more in the Air Force our test and training. I'd say we have room for improvement on test training, experimentation, and probably across the Joint Force being even better at all of that together. But
I would just say if we're going to learn a lesson about designing a force or testing a system or experimenting with a system, and then we expect to hand it off to the fleet forces, and then learn on a different set of adjudication software or a different set of modeling and simulation that is not harmonized with how we design the force, we're going to learn two different lessons. And while we'll at one point be convinced that this is the force and capability that we need, if we don't give the operating forces the ability to actually learn the same lesson, they're going to push back vehemently, that believing that they're going to lose with that new concept or capability because the adjudication software is not the same. So, you know, the war gaming, the war fighting, the testing, and the experimentation all need to be harmonized and synergized as we go to the future. That modeling sim is going to be important for us with one standard as we move out.
And let me just add something. So the adversary is advancing very rapidly in a software-defined world, and I think we're going to have to get comfortable perhaps with being able to do things without the well-defined experimentation in order to be able to respond to the adversary's rapidly advancing capabilities. And so I think that's more of a paradigm shift in our heads of we can't to the Admiral's point, perfect being the enemy of good enough. At some point, good enough may have to be without any experimentation at all. We just need to move out in order to be on pace or outpacing our adversary.
I can't decide. Two? Got it. Thanks for that. All right, this is a question about space, the space domain. Obviously, it's substantially different since World War II, the 1980s. It continues to evolve. Can you speak to how the Joint Force is training and educating, but also training its service members of the space domain? We don't have a Space Force rep on the panel, obviously, but if you could speak to that, that'd be great.
So because I'm the operational lead for the Air Force on the Secretary of the Air Force's Operational Imperative number 7, and my Space Force counterpart, Brigadier General Endicott, there's a big focus on the Space Force for their operational training and test infrastructure. The Space Force today does all of their training on their live systems, right? And so in an environment where you haven't been contested, that's okay, but now as the adversary is starting to contest space and whatnot, they need something where they can do things in the space environment that they need to. I'll tell you, I've mentioned maybe in this session, maybe in the last one, but there is a venue out there that we go to where we get some high-end training. And they do inject space effects into that training for us. A lot of it is so SAP stowed, classified, that the players, all they see is an effect, but not necessarily how it happened. But it's very valuable to know that there is a domain out there that can have effects that affect your operations. And so bringing more of that, and I know the Space Force is looking, like I think I mentioned in here, of getting on board with JSE and putting their effects into JSE because of that interdependency that we have with the Space Force.
I think, again, I don't want to harp too much on this, but from our NAVPLAN implementation framework, how we're going to shoot long-range fires is forcing us to have conversations with the Space Force. Engagements with the SWAC. Help me out there, Surface Warfare, or Space Warfare Analysis Center, close?
Yes.
Okay, we're having conversations just because of that effort to consummate long-range fires. I'll leave it at that. In terms of informing space to some of our requirements, as is, hey, we don't want to reveal our location when we're having to use space as a transport layer. It doesn't fit with our scheme of operations. We need to remain silent. MCOM operations, if you will. So I think there is probably in the last 2 years, there is more and more conversations being had between the Navy, the Air Force, and space than we had in some time. I'm not leaving the Army and the Marines out of this. From where I sit, that's what I'm aware of.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I would say the other critical aspect when you talk about space is if there's a potential conflict or crisis in the future, it's not an Indo-PACOM problem, it is a global issue. And when you look at the space domain, that impacts globally. So our ability to train to that, see what the impacts or the trade-offs are going to be as we look at that type of environment. Right now, we're trying to ascertain it, but having some sort of capability where we can get repetition to it is going to be invaluable because we can't look at it as a soda straw, hey, this just affects the Indo-PACOM AOR. It's going to affect the entire system and across outside the DoD as well. So.
And I believe we also have to, what we're training is as we lock up, from the PACE plan, as you have to go digitally silent and turn off all the space systems, you have to go back to 1975, 1980 and operate manual compass. I mean, I know that sounds premier, but it's something that's very challenging for all of our formations to do it at darts and charts, and you have to manage that analog cop because you will lose it. Not may, you will, and we got to restore combat operations and maintain tempo, and so that's one of the things we're working at the DIRT CTCs at the tactical level with brigades, but all the way up into divisions. And I know it always makes them mad as a former commander out at NTC to, why am I keeping this paper map with acetate and graphics? What are these markers? What am I doing? And as soon as we turn off that cop, and most of the time they do it to themselves, but when the enemy does vote, you got to be prepared to move on in an analog manner.
Yeah. Train for the space domain to lose the space domain.
Right.
All right,
Redundancy.
And also,
Redundancy.
all right, final question. Can you discuss the future vision of the JSE 2030 Plus? Will it include all branches? Will it be multi-domain?
So if I have a vote, yes, JSE needs to be all branches, all domain. The challenge is going to be getting there from the cost perspective of it. But in a perfect world, that would be what it would be, is all domain, all service, and allies and partners included in that as well. If I were able to wave a wand and have a magic checkbook.
And none of us has those magic checkbooks. The Navy's in the JSC. Now it's a question of what's the scale. What else are we going to scale it to?
And what's the priority, right? So while that is the panacea that everything is in there, it's what needs to go in there next,
Exactly.
and then what's second, and then what's third, because there should be the priorities of what is most important on night one of a peer conflict. And so that's the piece that the joint force needs to work together on. What is the next, where do we spend the next dollar for the best bang for the buck for the department?
Any other comments from the panel?
I'll just say much of what we're going to have to do in the Indo-Pacific is going to have to be federated. Federated strikes, federated communications. If you're not able to actually put together in time and space multiple weapons on a single target in minutes, vice hours and days, we're going to fail. And we've got to do that multiple times in a day to be able to win against an adversary who's building, double-digit ships in a year compared to us who's well below that. So what I would just say is, again, we have to be very open-minded in that the JSE should be all-encompassing, and we need to prioritize those assets that are going to give us that federated capability, the key assets that give us that federated strike capability probably first for the joint force, and then move out on the nice-to-haves as we get along.
I think the only thing I would add is, and I realize the audience I'm talking to, but I think you'll get it. Technology alone is not the answer. There's technology that we need to pursue, we need to attain, and we need to do it faster. But there's an operational art piece that gets lost in many of these conversations. And the thinking warfighter and our people, I think, is still one of our asymmetric advantages. So in terms of applying the operational art across spectrum domains is going to be as important some people may push back on it, but I'll say it to be provocative, will be as important as the technology in and of itself. When you look at numbers, some may say it's a false choice, you need both. And we may, but that'll come down to what are the priorities.
All right, well, I think that's a pretty perfect place to leave it. Admiral Khan, General Iams, General Miller, General Lombardo, General Rowley, thank you all very much.
Oh, sucks going after you. You're so eloquent.